So for this month's Catapult High Performance Practitioner interview, I'm at Newcastle United's training ground with Paul Catterson, club doctor, and Jamie Harley, the sports scientist. I think it's a real opportunity to look at the way in which the different disciplines within a science and medicine department actually gel together. So first of all, thanks very much guys for giving up some of your time. I think just as an opener, it'd be really useful for people out there just to get your take on how a modern sports science and medicine department in today's Premier League football actually functions and what you think its core function and purpose actually is. So Paul?
Thanks Chris. For me, the main function, you've got to go back to basics all the time really, is we're supporting the players, trying to maximise their performance, but undoubtedly trying to maximise that availability to the manager, both for either a training session, but specifically obviously for match day as well. So we basically have to get fit players onto the pitch to make them available for the manager. We've sort of evolved over time, I think, at Newcastle, and that's why I think it's quite novel, hopefully, that both of us are here talking to you really, because I don't think either department, certainly from the medical side, could work in a football club without the support of the other really. And that's sort of been fundamental when I first came in terms of trying to bring a back to basics approach when we first came in, doing the simple things right at the bottom of your pyramid and then working up and bolting the special things on top of that really.
Okay, and Jamie, from the sports science perspective, would you echo that? Is there anything that you could add that maybe you would build, certainly from the point of view of getting fit players out on the field, but I guess also from the point of view of getting healthy players out on the field?
Yeah, I think the core of it is that the player is at the centre of everything that we do. So as Paul says, there's that relationship with the staff and the manager which can change over time, but the players are the constant within the place. They're the ones, the important ones really. So from a sports science perspective, I find there's a lot of fluff within the industry, and maybe we'll get onto that a bit later, but I just think, as Paul said, doing the basics very, very well is the key part of the job really. So never getting away from being consistent with body weights and very simple things, hydration and nutrition. Getting those basics right is the foundation, but that's a challenge within itself, just to get those basics right. Once you've got that, then obviously the function of the players should follow suit, and then you can add on the little bits on top. But generally, yeah, just the health and well-being of the playing staff comes with encouraging them to do the right things on and off the pitch, I think.
And I guess, I mean, both of you now have been at Newcastle for, well, I think Jamie about 7 years, Paul about 10 years. During that time, you've obviously worked with several coaches and managers, each of which bring their own philosophies to the club. And I guess when a new manager does come in with new philosophies and approaches to training and the like, that maybe challenges a little bit your ability to maintain the health and fitness of the players, because these different stresses can obviously have a negative impact on the way in which players respond.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really important, certainly in the environment that we're in, you've got to be quite flexible and open-minded really, and we've certainly found that sort of more recently. The different coaches bring their own qualities with them, and I think almost I try and take something from each coach that I've worked with really, and take that forward to almost build my own model or my own way of operating. I don't know it all, we don't know it all, but I think if you're constantly taking some of that experience and applying it on a day-to-day basis, then hopefully you're not going to go too far wrong some of the time. But I think the most important thing for me is that sort of trust and communication between certainly the manager, the coaching staff, and the medical and sports science staff really, because if that doesn't work, then everything else is going to fall by the wayside really. You've got to be able to have a conversation with the coaches face to face, look them in the eye, and they've got to be able to respect what you say and vice versa. So you can have an open conversation but in a closed room where you're both able to air your views and you're not just there as a yes man. But obviously there are instances where that's not as easy sometimes, and you have to change your way of practice. You can still be respectful, but you just have to operate in a slightly different manner, I think, really.
A few interesting points that you make there regarding some things which are clearly fundamental, which is about mutual respect, trust and good communication. And I guess when a new coach comes into a club, they come in with a primary mission, and part of the task that you've got is actually to try and build those bridges and actually build that trust. I wonder how do you actually go about that? I mean, again, is it just about getting the basics right, not trying to impress by overdoing it and over-egging the pudding, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think obviously the new managers come in for a reason, and you've got to remember that, is that something has not been functioning correctly before that. So I think it's a good time for you to look at your own practice, even within the medical and sports science department as well. Have I actually been operating where I should have been at 100% for the recent 12 months, 18 months? But I think there is a sense of not trying to prove yourself to the next person, but I think it's trying to gain that respect and trust. And the way in which I try and do that really is just trying to be honest and truthful, really, because I think if you're anything other, it will catch you out eventually. And I think if that person, whoever it is, can see that you're an honest person and are trying to do the best things in the best interest for the players, then hopefully you can't go too far wrong.
I guess, Jamie, from the sports science stroke fitness side of things, you know, the work that you're carrying out on the training field when there's a transition in coaching staff is something that you really do have to kind of contemplate. Okay, is it complementary perhaps to the work of the coach? I wonder if maybe you could give us some kind of an example as to how you've maybe had to question your own practice when the new coaches come on board.
Yeah, I mean, my time at Newcastle has been with 5 different managers, and I would say probably 7 different fitness coaches. So the dynamic changes with each one. So there's obviously, you know, we've had a big change at the moment as we have a Spanish setup with a Spanish manager and Spanish coaches with a completely different philosophy of work to, say, the English managers that we've had in the past. Now it's not that, you know, one's right and one's wrong, it's just different ways of working. The Portuguese will work in a different way, the Italians will work in a different way. So from that point of view, I think it's interesting to see how the different systems work and to try and learn, you know, the positives from each one. I think the old English way, which you probably see less and less of now, which is that the fitness coach is in charge of the fitness of the players and the coaches do the football side of the work. I suppose when I first joined Newcastle, that was the setup that you'd see most of all, is that the fitness coach would take the players and do some runs or do some sprints or do some work in the gym, but it wasn't necessarily joined up with what was happening in the actual football session. And then obviously came along these different ideas in football with the tactical periodisation and probably fitness coaches moving towards more of the football side of things and trying to get your fitness within football drills rather than doing isolated drills. So I think for me it's been, and I've done a few presentations looking at the different systems and different training styles over with different managers. And for me it's just been trying to take, as Paul said, the good things from each one, the positives from each one. I think regardless of your philosophy and your approach, I always think of it as, say, the science and the medicine have a quite a defined role, and the coaches have a different defined role, but all of them are responsible for the development and the work that goes into the players every day. Now, regardless of what system or philosophy you use, if those 3 areas are working well together, then I think the system's productive. And so, for example, I've seen Paul Balsam's talks with Leicester City, the amazing season when they won the league. They would work in a system which would probably be classed as a classic English system with the rest day during the week, and which is different to the system, say, we would use now. But from what he says, from talking to him, all those departments and everything worked very, very well for that season, and everything just worked for them. So I guess we've had occasions where the departments haven't had that relationship, haven't worked sort of very well together, and it just means that everything falls apart. So, but I would say at the moment we have a good setup in terms of, Paul brought me into the club, and we worked very, very closely ever since. Worked with different managers across that time, more or less been on a similar journey together. And you're kind of reliant on which manager comes in and the coaching staff he brings in and the relationships you can build with them, really.
Okay. And so you're talking there about, I suppose, the coaches coming in with their own philosophies of working and trying to create a complementary environment with the philosophies that underpin your work. But then, of course, you've got the players that are coming in as well in what is very much a multicultural, multinational game nowadays. And I guess they come in with their own expectations, which sometimes might challenge the fundamentals on which you operate. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I think so. I think, as Jamie said, the players at the centre of everything, really. But I think that respect obviously has to go towards the players as well, as professionals, that what we're asking them to do and what they're asking them to undertake on a daily basis, and now how we're asking them to live their lives essentially 24/7. But I think because they come from such different backgrounds sometimes, that multicultural way even of how they might experience medical care or their family structure really is key that we've got to understand as well, because I don't think it's fair that we have to apply our rigid English structure to that individual and they're coming into our environment. We've got to be flexible with them really as well and their previous experiences. I think mainly on the medical side of things, I'd say that. So an example might be if the player sustains a serious injury, then I think it's okay to have 2 opinions, 3 opinions, and I'll go to the people I respect and trust about complicated problems, but they'll have their own ideas as well. And I think as soon as I say to a player, no, you can't go to that individual in your home country and do that, then I think it makes the situation very difficult. But if you embrace that and communicate with the professional in their country and see that you're going to go halfway and have some kind of 2-way conversation about it, I think you can come up with a successful outcome really for the player.
Yeah. I guess, again, you mentioned the trust word, and the trust applies in so many different ways within a football club and respect. But you are, as a department, you're a multidisciplinary department or an interdisciplinary department. You're faced with challenges on a day-to-day basis. And I'm guessing not all of the time will you agree on how these challenges might be addressed. Now, one of the reasons I'm delighted to be here talking to you guys is because quite clearly, you are a department that does work so well together. But I just wonder how you address those situations where perhaps you do have a little bit of a disagreement regarding perhaps the best pathway forward with regards to a performance challenge.
Yeah. I think it's actually healthy to have some kind of disagreement and discussion sometimes, and the way in which we try and do it here is that I've tried to get specialists and experts in their area within the department. So I have none of the expertise that Jamie has, for example, but I trust him to know that he can do his job and that area is sorted. And the same goes with the physiotherapists, the sports therapists, really. But what we have in the morning is, I think quite a few clubs will have a closed room discussion with the whole of the medical departments. There's probably about 10 of us in the morning. We'll sit down, we'll just go through the injuries or any issues there might be for that day. But I really encourage, if anyone's got a disagreement about anything in the way in which we're doing the rehabilitation or the way in which we're testing the players, that it's aired in that forum, because as soon as we go out of that door, we need a united front of the medical department, both to the players and the coaching staff, because if the players see that there's some disagreements within the staff, or the coaching staff see, well, he actually thinks we should be doing it that way, then that's when problems can arise. I mean, I'm not saying it's perfect, and we're not, but I think having those healthy discussions and making sure people do air their disagreements and grievances is healthy.
I think just to add to that is where you have different experts in different fields, but you have this hierarchy in the structure as well, which I think is key, and that's really important, so that they might have different views within a department, but ultimately in the medical department things will go, and Paul will more or less have the final say on what happens, and that will be discussed with the manager. And I'm sure same in the coaching department, they'll have pure disagreements, and then a final call will be made. But I think again, going back to my own experiences, there's when you experience times that you maybe don't have that hierarchy and no one's actually in charge of making the final decision, and you just have different opinions, and somebody has to try and make sense of it, and it just leads to difficulties.
That's a good point, really, though, because I think in traditional sports medicine models, the athlete's at the centre, but you have this sort of wheel around the athletes, and there's almost this equality, which is great and fine in practice. But I think someone's got to carry the can at the end of the day. Someone's got to make a decision or be accountable to. So if I have to be accountable to the manager or the chief executive about why this has happened and why that hasn't happened, you do need that hierarchical structure in place. But that's not to say you're a dictator. It's just you're trying to formulate an opinion and an output based on all these expert opinion which you're receiving daily.
And so I'm guessing what you're saying then is, I mean, obviously at the end of the day, as head of department, Paul, you carry the can. But if it's a decision that requires specialist input, say from Jamie will make the decision that will be communicated through yourself. Would that be appropriate?
I think in terms of my role in the sports science side, it probably sits in the middle of the medical and the coaching. So whereas I have a good relationship with Paul also with Paco, who's the assistant manager, who, to be fair, his experiences as a fitness coach originally, so he's very, very clued up on everything to do with physical preparation of the players, and ultimately he plans the program and makes the final decision on the training load of the players out on a training pitch. So we can pass on our feelings or the information that we have from the data in the morning. That gets circulated in the medical meeting, and then usually I'll go through and see Paco, and then he can make the final decision on the load of the player in training. So, but again, with that system and the communication, which is very, very good with Paco and the manager, then it makes the system that much easier. I mean, I did a talk a few weeks ago, and I was having to think about what makes this is obviously to do with Catapult, but where the data or the data analytics fits into your program. And really, not to put Catapult down or to turn people off from using it, but you can do the job without the information if you've got knowledge, experience, and a quite a clear philosophy of what you want to do. Now, what clearly the coaching staff have and the medical staff have a lot of knowledge and experience. That regardless of the data or the feedback or the GPS or the heart rate or whatever it is, if that was to disappear tomorrow, we could continue and do your job. But when those three things are working well, I think the data becomes really insightful just to help that system along, because it just helps make the decisions in the morning, helps us pass on information about if we've got any concerns about the player, and then when you've got the decision maker in there who is allowed to make a decision, then it becomes quite a powerful tool, I think.
And I guess what we're talking about here then, going back to what you said initially there, Paul and Jamie, was it's just about getting the fundamentals, getting the basics right, such that on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis you can operate. But it's something that I am interested in is the fact that, yes, of course you invest time in ensuring that you do the best by the players day-to-day, week-to-week, but you also make that little bit of time to invest in projects that might have a more sort of medium-term or long-term benefit, or maybe no benefit at all. But you're engaging in some kind of research where there isn't actually an evidence base, but you feel that it's worth pursuing yourselves. I wonder if you could maybe just give a little bit of insight into some of the projects that the club's undertaking, without giving too much away, of course.
I think we've had a lot of projects that have had no benefit at all, but I'll let Paul talk about
those. Yeah, exactly. But I think it came years ago, maybe I was a bit naive when I first started, but I tried to create this sort of injury prediction model, which I'm sure everyone's trying to predict. But number one, you've got to have the baseline data, and number two, you have to apply it to your population, really. So that's the way in which you've gone about things, really, and starting simply, as Jamie said, even with sort of body weights and things like that, but looking at other parts of the athlete individually, and so their sleep, the genetics, the biomarkers. But I think actually, as with all these things, it started for me once when we had a player that came back from a major tournament, and we just couldn't get him up to speed in the pre-season period. We couldn't put our finger on why or what was wrong, or we're looking at problems at home or out on the pitch, and we just couldn't put our finger on anything really. So it made me want to delve a little bit deeper into the athlete, And as with all these things, I think in sort of the high performance environment, there isn't necessarily a proven way to do it. But from a doctor's point of view, if you're not doing any harm, but you're investigating these things, then why not, essentially? So we embarked at that stage on basically what was probably our biomarker program, so basically blood taking and looking at sort of 40 or 50 variables, but not looking at them in a traditional medical doctor way in terms of inflammatory markers, blood counts and things like that. We would look at full blood counts, kidney function, hormone profiles from a performance point of view, really, but then tried to build that bank of data up over a period of time. So we've got, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 years of data essentially now. Yeah, the athletes might change, but if you look at our current squad, we've probably got about between 5 and 10 data points on each player, and we're building up a norm for those players. So the central defender might have a different norm to the goalkeeper, to our striker. And then trying to overlay some of the GPS data on top of that, maybe some of the genetics data, maybe and our injury history data in terms of what is actually causing the change in the signal, and trying to take away the noise, which isn't always that easy. But you're quite right. I think for me, you need to have an idea of sort of grand plan in a way, really, and you've got to work towards that, but in sort of bite-sized chunks. But at the end of the day, you still got to remember where you're trying to get to, because you can get lost in the day-to-day things within a football club, I think.
And you mentioned in there about, obviously you've got about 5 years worth of data and players come and go. And I guess one of the big challenges when it comes to this signal and noise is you're dealing with a specific population, and it's a very small population. And actually, to treat them as a population probably takes away from the value of information if you were to deal with it on an individual level, because as we know, we get responders, non-responders to the same stimuli within this group. So I'm guessing it does take time before you can actually start to build those individual profiles that become meaningful for that player.
Yeah, I mean, the statisticians always joke that we deal with that we need more injuries, basically, and I think we've had our fair share over the years, but yeah, it's trying to apply a model to that, really, and then you've got to look retrospectively as well, but also trying to change your practice prospectively, really, into what you're trying to do on a day-to-day basis.
I think as you said, it's a medium or long-term project in terms of you're collecting bloods over a long period of time to understand the profiles. But what we try to do is to also give it a short-term impact as well, or at least put the correct interventions in place to try and help the players with the information we get. So I guess with the player that Paul was mentioning, who was possibly, I guess, in a scientific term would probably be overreached or overtrained from, not necessarily from physical stresses, although he had been away with his international team, but just mental stresses as well, and that's often the thing. Obviously, with any club, and anybody will appreciate this, is that the contact time with the players is very little, really. So the stresses at home, the lifestyle, the problems with the family, obviously have a huge impact on their mood and the way they arrive at the training ground. It's been quite interesting with the blood tests that we've had, is that every time we do these tests, which is about every 3 months, we do categorise players that are getting deficient or getting quite high in certain levels. So we just try and really simplify it and look at the markers that are related to recovery, look at the markers that are related to immunity, to energy availability, and then looking at simple things like vitamin D, just because we can make an intervention with all of those areas. There might be more specific ones like iron supplementation that Paul can look at in more detail with the player, but we just say, how as a squad can we get some improvement out of every individual? And it's been quite effective, I think, because we're now at a position where we've done our recent profiling of the players, and we're seeing good improvements now, and because we're able to communicate that back to them, give them all a nice little report to say how they progressed or where they can still make improvements. I think the players do respond to that. They like having the feedback, and a lot of them are, I think there's been I would say possibly a change over the time that I've been involved in football. Just not so much the professionalism, but just the attitudes of the players. There's maybe, as you say, different cultures coming in with different ideas, but there's, I guess the players want to try and improve themselves, or there's big competition now between places, and the intensity of the league, particularly the Premier League that we've seen this year, is massive, and the players want to be at the level of the Manchester Cities, or the top players that they're watching at the top teams that they're competing against. They want to be at that level physically. So how do they get there?
And so you've seen a definite, I suppose, development or evolution in the level of engagement that the player would have with. I mean, the project you're talking about involves some pretty high-end science, and obviously that's got to be calibrated according to who it is that's receiving it. But it's really interesting to hear that the players do engage to that extent with it.
You've got to have that playing. The players have got to see the immediate benefit of doing it, otherwise they won't come in at 9 o'clock to get a venous blood sample taken. But also I think the coaches are bought into it a little bit as well, so we'll even go, it sounds ridiculous, but you'll take the manager's blood and give him a bit of feedback, or the coaches themselves, and it sort of becomes alive for them then, really, and they can then say, oh, actually, yeah, I could have that benefit, I could optimise that within my home life to help me out on the pitch as well. So we've got buy-in from the manager as well, I think.
Yeah. I think it's just, as with everything, it is high-level science, but if you can simplify it, not reduce it in any way, but just simplify it and visualise it so it's meaningful. And I think the players are generally, this would be across most clubs, I think they're pretty receptive to that information, I think.
I suppose going back a little bit then to, okay, you're a department that tries to get the fundamentals right, but then you do draw from specialisms to help where you might feel that you don't quite possess the expertise. It might be useful if you could just give us some kind of an overview of the sort of specialisms that you do draw from to help what is, I suppose it's a performance department, it's not a science and medicine department, it's a performance department.
I suppose from a medical point of view, I'll draw on experts from around the country, obviously, or internationally for players. And again, it comes back to keeping your mind open a little bit, really. You get inundated with people who want to sell their latest product, and it's really difficult sometimes to try and see what is going to be, not the next best thing, but what is actually going to make a benefit to your population, going back to that again, really. So you have to engage with people, but you've always got to think at the end of the day, because we are in a high performance environment, which is that going to benefit the players in my squad or the position of our team in the league for games on the Saturday, because that's it at the end of the day. So have you got any specific thoughts?
Yeah, I think we obviously have our own experiences, but say, for example, whenever we get the blood biomarkers, we'll then have a direct consultation with Nathan Lewis, who's a clinical nutritionist from Oracle. So he will review our blood scores, go through individually and give us some advice. So with his expertise is way above nutritionally where both of ours is. So
yes.
We'll take his advice on board and then sort of communicate that with the players. We'll then have our training data, which we anonymise, and probably for the last 3 or 4 seasons we share it with John Newell, who's a biostatistician from the University of Galway. So John does some really good work. Again, his statistical knowledge is way above any of ours, so we just, he's using the R stats and comes up with some really good visual dashboards to visualise our data. So in terms of the day-to-day running and managing the training load and managing the data and dealing with the players, that's all done in-house. But those medium long-term projects is where we can draw from these people with really good experience and good knowledge just to help us along. And as you say, these are longer term projects which are probably really interesting for us to be involved in. But they do have implications because they change our thinking over time. I think, and I'd certainly say I've learnt a lot from in that area from dealing with people like John and Nathan. We have Tony Derbyshire who is with us as a consultant a couple of days a month as a performance coach, and he'll sit individually with players and from a nutritional point of view and go through their eating plans. And I think it's important sometimes to have someone external, but someone who's in enough that the players trust, but probably isn't in every day, that they're not immersed in the environment. Because it probably helps myself and Paul out as well, that we speak to the players every day, but sometimes it's nice to have a different face, a different sounding board for those players.
Yeah, they might not tell us everything, you don't think.
Yeah,
all the
exactly.
time.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to know everything.
Yeah.
But I think that's important because I think you've got to keep the. That's part of the reason with the research as well. You've got to keep the staff motivated, and I think part of my ethos has been that you've got to develop as an individual and practitioner as well, really, because people don't stay here all the time. People move on to different environments, and as I said before, it's easy to get sucked in by doing your day-to-day job, but as an individual, you've got to try and put your name on papers. You've got to try and do some research in the environment as well, really, and to have those ideas and hopefully to be able to let that happen is important.
Sure. So, in the spirit of sort of forward thinking, it's really interesting to listen about, certainly about the project you've got ongoing with biomarkers and the like at the moment. But I'm going to ask both of you, I suppose, independently, to look forward and just give your thoughts in terms of, okay, so what are the big challenges now in your own area within professional football? There's been a whole heap of money invested in keeping very expensive, very important players on the pitch and investing in the present, I suppose. But to continue doing that, we've got to invest in the challenges that we're facing at the moment to enable us to continue to move on. Jamie, perhaps from the point of view of sports science, big challenges that we're facing at the moment and maybe in the future.
Yeah, I think the industry as a whole has maybe had a bit of a difficult period, I would say, over the last few years. It's changed a lot, I think. There's been a massive explosion of people undertaking a sports science degree. I think it's probably the most popular course at universities at the moment across the country, and every university more or less has a course now. So, and I think the reason is it's a very, very interesting area. People, I guess, elite sport is only one of the areas you can work in with a sports science degree, but it's obviously clearly attractive for people from the outside to be involved. So I think there's a difficulty there with probably the amount of people that are coming through, but then again the industry wasn't really regulated up until quite recently with BASES and the development of the EPPP within the academy system. So I think we're at the point at the moment where there's a lot of staff coming through. They're just at the point of starting to get some accreditation and get just to make sure that everybody has the correct knowledge to be working in the environment, because as you say, it's worth a lot of money now, and you see in the Premier League, 5 or 6 managers gone already. We're not even at Christmas yet. It's because the pressures are so high at this level to stay in the league and to compete at this level. So I think from that point of view, everybody's at risk. This security is never 100% obviously in football or in any elite sport, but I think to get around that, again it comes back to that very, very simple message of just not overcomplicating things and not forgetting where you come from and what the basics are, because there's obviously a lot of the technology's moved on so far in every area now that there's a lot of companies can offer you a really good piece of kit, and that'll obviously continue to develop. I find myself more and more cynical now with anything that comes up, just thinking at the moment we haven't got time to take it on board. It's obviously really interesting to see them and to look at them, but I think it has to have a real benefit to before you take things on board now. So there's been a definite change, I'd say, in the sports science. I think it's a difficult period. I think it comes under a lot of scrutiny. There's a lot of stuff on social media at the moment, and people have a tough time, I guess. Some people like to blow their own trumpet a little bit more than others. Not looking at you directly there.
Cheers.
But no, it'll be interesting to see how it develops. But I think for me personally, it's always just about staying grounded, keeping up to date with other clubs, and just speaking to people and see what goes on. I guess things like this are good just to see what's happening within the industry.
So, from the sports science perspective, it's interesting that the real challenges are actually fundamentals. So it's in relation to, I suppose, governance of the profession, and we still haven't actually got the basics absolutely nailed.
No, I think that's fair to say.
Okay. From a sports medicine perspective,
from on a more sort of practical level on a day-to-day basis, I think what we're asking the players to achieve physically now is just going up and up each year. We know what's happened to the high intensity work, sprint distances, and it's going to come to a ceiling at some stage, because what I'm finding is that we're getting much higher grade, more severe injuries now, with huge forces going through tendon muscle interfaces, and then potentially the players out for a lot longer time really. So for me the challenge is dealing with higher grade injuries, but I fundamentally believe that genetics are going to play a huge role in years to come, certainly from a sports medicine point of view. And I think we could all name players who we've worked with in the past that whatever you do, you think you're covering everything, whichever specialist they go and see, they'll still break down, unfortunately, no matter how much you can help them. And I think there are huge ethical issues around genetics, but I think that's going to be the important thing going forward. It might not be 10 years, it might be longer than that really, but I think we've got to keep our eye on that really. On a sort of departmental level, I think it's trying to keep an even keel really through the times of good and bad that a football club and team goes through. You'll get new staff coming in various areas, but you've got to try and keep that even keel really, and keep moving forward, I think, is the important thing. So they're my main issues.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you very much for giving up your time. I really do appreciate it, and I wish you well for the rest of the season.
Cheers, Chris.
Thanks very much.